I'm back again with another lesson on ethics in visual journalism. Today we will be talking about the challenges of reporting on victims of sexual violence or covering a conflict situation with a focus on feminist ethics in journalism. In our previous 3 lessons, we have focused more on the basic codes of ethics, which are and talked about truthfulness, independence, and how to minimize harm. These are done mostly from the universalistic perspectives, given that these principles, these ethical principles, will work in all situations, irrespective of historical context, social situation, or even geographical locations. But these basic ethical concepts are not even before we start our today's discussion. We must emphasize that these basic principles that we have discussed in the first 3 classes are equally important in our professional grooming, but we also need to critically look at these codes that are introduced to us as applicable to all situations, because we all work as a visual reporters in different situations, and our own social identities also affects how we decide and what we decide in a particular context. So today we are basically trying to contextualize the basic codes that we discussed in the first 3 classes, and in the first class I have introduced you with major ethical guidelines and ethical codes that are institutional codes that are globally applicable or used in different media houses. For example, we have talked about the ethical guideline that's been used by AFP, or the ethical guideline that is used by Al Jazeera, and then there are some there are ones that are approved or endorsed by networks like Institute for Ethical Journalism. So today's discussion will give you a scope for comparing and complicating these generic ethical codes in your own context, and also help you understand the other forces in the media industry that affects our decisions. And there are major debates in journalism and media studies, mass communication studies. There are major philosophical debates around these questions of ethical universalism. These debates generally reject the claim that ethical codes can be deduced from a set of timeless ideas. For example, the ideas that I have just mentioned, the independentness, truthfulness, or doing no harm. These are core ethical principles, but these are rather decontextualized ideas. So how do we, and very important ideas, but how do we contextualize them? How do we make them useful for our own everyday practices is what we will be discussing today from a feminist perspective. Now one may ask, why precisely from a feminist perspective, given that there are many other ethical guidelines which dealt with the question of race, ethnicity, social inequality from different perspectives. What is primarily we need to understand is that we have to, as we work and grow in our professional life, we need to be able to work out our own ethical reasoning to undo, to negotiate, navigate a reality which cultivates in many ways, which perpetuate different forms of inequalities, different forms of power structures that we face every day as we produce images. And feminist ethics, or feminist scholars, feminist image makers have questioned these universal decontextualized codes because they do not speak to their concerns, especially mainstream media, the way they report on events of sexual violence be it in a conflict situation or in an everyday situation. Oftentimes, because of the societal male dominance, or even sometimes if you're talking about a wartime situation, there are other political equations that influence those the ways a story is reported. So there are many feminist intervention in the feminist intervention in ways. The point that we are trying to make is that there cannot be one disembodied idea that will help you be true to a story from the survivor's perspective. A neutral story has the risk of missing the survivor's perspective, because the true perspectives are often influenced by the bias of the editorial policy and of a media house, and the editorial policy of the media house is biased and influenced by different interests. It is influenced by state policy, it is influenced by corporate interest of the investor that invested in that particular media house, and of course social ideologies. If you are talking about women survivors, of course there are questions of patriarchal ideologies. And then there is photographers or image makers' own internalized biases that are at work here. In everyday journalistic practices, if you pay close attention, you will see how class, gendered, and ethnic and racial biases are visible. Given if you look and review the stories, the way the everyday newspaper, mainstream media presents these stories. So the feminist intervention is an intervention that tries to highlight the question of difference, how to accommodate difference in our visual reporting. But it's a long conversation. Ideally, a course can be developed focusing on each of these social categories, that focusing on racial biases, ethnic biases, ideological biases, Western divide in image making, imperial interest in image making, and the corporate industry, the image industry, how it speaks to the demand, market demands of all of these things creates demand for particular images that at times invisibilize social differences and influences our editorial decision when we are in a situation and taking a picture. All of this influences our act of taking the moment of that in which we capture that moment. From what point we will be taking the picture is not just a question of truth making. It is not just a question of how independent I am, because I am never truly independent. These are points that, and then the question of doing no harm. Feminist ethicist or feminist scholar in media studies are saying that even when you're trying to say that you're not doing harm, you may as well, if you're unaware of the repercussion of the image that you have produced and represented and sold to a news media, it could have, if you are not prepared, have unintended consequences. So this is where the feminists are making an intervention to the code of ethics that already exists and globally recognized. And most recently, a code is formulated that is known as Murad Code. And in the remainder of this class, I will be talking about, or I will be introducing you to three different code of ethics written from a feminist perspective. The first one is Murad Code. It is named after Nadia Murad. She is an Iraqi human rights activist. She is, of course, as you all probably know, that a Nobel laureate, and she is also a survivor of sexual violence. So very recently a code of ethics is drafted and it is under review right now, and to help writers researchers, photographers to act compassionately. So it is not just a question of being truthful and independent or doing no harm, but it is also important to be compassionate, to be able to recognize all different possibilities of harm that could do after you collect a testimony. The circulation of the testimony once you take the story from the victim, and then the story goes out in public, and what happens to that story, because you are the custodian of the stories. So keeping that in mind, as a custodian of the story, as a custodian of the image that you have taken from that particular survivor, how do you act ethically? And keeping these concerns in mind, a Murad Code was drafted recently, and it is conceived as a global instrument for guiding researcher, writer, visual reporters to be ethical when you are collecting testimony, collecting story or images of a survivor of a violence in a conflict situation. There are some events that has prompted this code, one of which is as you all know, in 2007, August 2017, when many Rohingyas were fleeing the military violence in Rakhine state of Myanmar. Fleeing the violence, they crossed the border and came to Bangladesh and took refuge in the Cox's Bazar, in different camps in Cox's Bazar. What happens? The global interest in that political situation, the interest in the stories of course everybody was horrified at the genocide, the experience of violence and suffering that were inflicted upon this population, and people wanted to know more. There was a serious and interest with good intention to know what has happened to the Rohingya community. What happened was that many visual reporters flocked those camps, took pictures, and they often have not followed minimum basic codes of ethics. But more importantly, they did not at all think about the future of those images. What happens once you put those images for public consumption? What happens to those images, and how it affects the people behind those cameras, the people of those that are imprinted in those images? One story that caught the attention of part of the group that has drafted the Murad Code is that one woman from Rohingya camp, her story was collected by different groups 21 times. And when a crime against humanity case was initiated in Hague under the International Crime Tribunal, she couldn't file her testimony because in all these 21 testimonies, her story was not exactly the same. Now this is not, this is for those who take still pictures or photojournalists who are strictly involved in still pictures. This story probably does not directly reflect them, but it's still important to remember how and when we should approach the same person. Should we think about all these different possible consequences? Because only because she was approached 21 times, she was probably willing to talk to journalists, but that doesn't mean that you take the story and don't think of it as multiple possibilities of use. So this is where the Murad Code came in, and in the description of the video below you will see the link, and I want you to go to the link so we can go over the very brief draft Murad code together. I mean, it's still not in the codes that will be promoted under this framework is not it's not concretized yet, but the goal of this code is there, and I think it helps you understand what are they trying to achieve. The first thing that it says is to distill, the goal of the code is to distill existing minimum or core standards which are critical for safe, effective and survivor-centric investigation and documentation of conflict-related sexual violence through the development and implementation of a globally supported code of conduct. So it's a first important step to recognize that we do need a code that's not just about truthfulness and independence. There is a need to recognize ethical complexities, ethical consideration for events such as covering sexual violence or visually documenting victims of sexual violence. And the second one, to strengthen respect for and fulfillment of survivors, witnesses, human rights, including with regards to dignity, privacy, health, safety, justice, remedies and development. This is something we don't often talk about because ethical conversation in photojournalism is so focused on, or even in generally mainstream the concern for ethics in journalism is more focused on truthfulness, objectivity, that we don't talk about justice. But you don't have to be invested in justice, but what you do through your visual reporting cannot create an impediment to justice. In the reference of Rohingya refugee that I have mentioned, the image, the stories, the collected research has become an impediment to the process of justice seeking. So that's something that we need to remember when as an image maker, because you don't have to be invested in the justice process, but you have to be aware that your work cannot be an impediment to justice. And I will leave the rest. There are only 5. I'll read the rest for you to read and move on to the next guideline that I want to discuss. But do spend a few minutes and read and think about the goals of this code of ethics, the Murad code. Is why, and think why they are important for us to have an ethical code of conduct from a survivor's perspective. So now let's move on to the next code of ethics, and it is formulated by Feminism in India. It is a collective of intersectional feminists in India, and the code was formulated as part of the global 16 days of activism global campaign that was initiated by United Nations. You will find the URL for this code again in the description of the description section of the video, and I want you to take a moment and go to the video so we can go over the guideline together. This guideline is not necessarily written thinking about the photojournalist or visual reporter. It is more for the journalist who writes, but I think it provides a good guideline that will help the decision making for a visual reporter on the ground. So by now I hope you all are there in the site. This is so Feminism in India. The collective proposes 16 steps with the expectations that if you follow this 16 step, your report on sexual violence, gender-based crimes will be more gender sensitive, will be more respectful to the survivor. So the first one that they propose is the most important one. It tells you to focus on the crime, not just on the individual. What happens, especially in the everyday mainstream media, is that when you hear about a crime, a sexual crime, we are more prone to capture the moment around the victim, not the crime. And in doing so, you get the story of victimhood and nothing else. But if you want your story to make a difference, if you want your story to tell more than the grotesque picture of the victim or the grotesque reality of the victim, then you need to focus on the surrounding, on the crime that has led to the moment in which someone has become a victim. And for visual reporters, there are many very interesting examples that already exist. I suggest you look at the I forgot the name. Anyway, I will write down the name in the description section because I can't remember the name right now. But again, to remind you, this is a very important guideline that you have to focus on the crime, not just on the individual. And the second one, this is also equally important, consider the class bias. Even if you are covering a gender crime, gender-based crime, even if you are covering a sexual crime, you have to think about the class context. When we report, again, the mainstream print and broadcast media, if the victim and the perpetrator, you will see how the reporting style are very different when the victim and the perpetrator are from the same class. If it's a cross class, the nature of the reporting is different, and if it's from the upper class, the nature of the reporting is again different. So here again, you need to focus on if you focus on the crime, not the victim, you will be able to recognize the visual clues of a situation which also recognizes class, because it's not just about the victim and the death and the trauma, but what has led to that trauma that we need to focus, because part of the reason we report is to prevent such tragic things not happening in future. To make that happen, you have to create an image that even if it can, because you are as a everyday image maker, you are there for a very brief moment. You don't have, not all photographer, all photojournalist, all assignments gives you the time that is needed for a detailed investigation. But our effort should be to leave visual clues, so a interested reader, an interested viewer can find that clue. So third one, avoid violation of privacy and identification. I won't focus more on this because we have discussed this question of right to privacy earlier in class in our lesson 2, but this is also important when you are covering an event of sexual crime. It is particularly difficult for a survivor of sexual violence if the reporters are harassing the survivor or their families. You have to remember, by way of trying to report on this particular crime, if you are not re-traumatizing the victim, you are not, and also try to be creative in your visual representation, because and avoid gender stereotypes of victim, because you don't want to see always the crying victim. If there is someone who is talking, try to approach them, and always, if you have time, you should also try to talk to number of victims, but that's not always the case. If you are dealing with a particular scene, there may not, there is a question of access. And related to the question of stop harassing survivors and their families, there is also a question of voyeurism. Never ever, I don't think I should be elaborating on this. Voyeurism is not accepted. Even if you have a camera on your hand, even if you have a journalist card on your pocket, you cannot be voyeuristic. This guideline spends a good amount of time and gives you a guideline about how to reimagine a victim, but it does so for a textual journalist. It helps you think, it probably helps you think about how you translate those clues, those guides for when you're doing visual work, when you are visually imagining or reporting on sexual survivors of sexual crimes. But because it is important, think of some of the everyday images that you see of a sexual victim of sexual crime, crying, or hiding her face or his face. If it's a male victim, you don't even see the image. If it's a child, then so there are certain preferred motifs that are used, and it's important to recreate these images without falling into the crying image of the victim. There is one last one that I want to mention from the 16 steps, is the one that is about policy guideline and skill training. If you are part of a media house, if you are part of a collective as a photojournalist or a visual reporter, it is upon us to ensure that our house, our collective has a policy, because ethics is never about an individual. It is shaped by, as I said earlier in the conversation, it is shaped by the editorial policy of the house, and the editorial policy of the house is also shaped by many other things. So it's very important, as we are talking about a feminist perspective, to ensure that there is a guideline for visual reporting, that these are do's and these are don'ts. If you have a general do's and don'ts for journalists, you should also have a do's and don't from a feminist perspective in every media house. The final guideline that I want to introduce is the one written by Nayonika Mukherjee and Nazmun Nahar Kea. It's a graphic novel that comes with an ethical guideline. The novel is based on years of ethnographic work by Nayonika Mukherjee on the lives and struggle of Birangona, the war heroines of 1971, the war of independence of Bangladesh. One of the findings of her long-standing ethnographic research is that the work of researcher, journalist, photojournalist that has collected their testimonies, their experience of war, have often had serious negative impacts in their lives. And she felt, along with her friends and comrades, there is a need to create a guideline towards ethical testimonies of sexual violence during conflict. So our last guideline, I request you to read this graphic novel, that you will again find the detail of this guideline you will find in the description of the video. And this will also, the next week's assignment is also around this novel. So I'm asking you to read this novel, and I will briefly talk about a few points she makes in this guideline that are not mentioned in the first two guidelines that I had discussed. So she has divided her guideline into three phases. First is the phase where before you start taking the testimony. Second is during the testimonial process, and then after the testimonial process. The most important thing that especially for photojournalists that are you are never told is that be prepared. Even if it's you got a chance, didn't get an advance notice about the assignment, do a Google search. Little background information will help you act more sympathetically to in that particular situation. And also, as you are preparing, or even if you're on your way, try to think of the angle that you will be with which you will be approaching the story, you will be approaching the victim or the family or the situation. During the testimonial process, or this is something that happens in overlapping phases, you must think about or do a risk assessment of the situation. What happens after you take the story, you take the testimony, after you take the photograph? It is very important to do that risk assessment when you are dealing with victims of sexual violence. And as I have mentioned earlier in the class, you know what could happen, that a victim could lose her chance at justice. It's important to think of how much time you have, and it's respectful of you if you tell your respondent, if you tell your subject or the person you're taking picture of that you don't really have much time. I mean, this helps you act more sympathetically, more ethically. And other point that in the first two guidelines is not mentioned is the question of consent. Noinika Mukherjee and her team are saying that you have to take informed consent meaningfully. By that, it doesn't mean that you go somewhere and ask them to just sign a document, but at every step of the way ask for permission. For example, you knocked at the door of a victim. She opened the door hesitantly, agreed that she won't mind if you take her picture, but as you develop a conversation, she starts to give you more details. Ask her again that if you can use that part of the story, because it's important. And informed consent is not just an instrument, it's also a way of ensuring that you're not doing any harm. And finally, remember to share the story if you have scope with the person that you have interviewed, you have taken images of. Never allow sensationalization of the image you have taken. And finally, make sure if you are working in a situation where the victim is still at risk, make sure that you ensure the confidentiality. In that case, it's visually very difficult, because when you're writing textually, it's just a matter of using a pseudonym, but if you're doing it visually, then you have to think of a visual strategy to how to maintain confidentiality, to leave visual marks, to take away the visual marks from the image. You have to think about, maybe you take the photograph from behind, you take a photo of a shadow, or try to think of other strategies how to make ensure anonymity visually, and anonymity and confidentiality visually. These guidelines that she proposed, Noinika Mukherjee proposes, are elaborate and comes with many points. I request you to read them closely. And the graphic novel comes with a self-assessment form. So for this week's assignment, I'm asking you to read the novel and do the self-assessment, to think whether you're prepared to do a particular story on victim of a sexual violence, and then propose your plan how you want to do a story on a victim of a sexual violence. I'll end our class today here and look forward to reading your assignments. See you next week.